Hi everyone. Today we will be making a set of coasters with a unique holder. Let's get started. So the inspiration for today's design comes from this Japanese hand plane. I absolutely love the way it looks, and I also, moreover, like Japanese tools in general because they tend to have a very simple design and the form always follows the function. And here it's no different. We have a block of wood, a blade, and a wedge to maintain that blade. So today we will be using this as an inspiration for our build. For the lumber, we're using scrap pieces of walnut for the holder and this beautiful piece of Bolivian rosewood for the coasters. Starting with the coasters, we first need to rough cut the Bolivian rosewood into a more manageable length. Then, we can use the jointer to flatten one of the face of the board as well as create a perpendicular edge. In order to conserve and maximize thickness of the board, I decided to use a drum sander instead of a planer to sneak up on flattening the opposing side. We can use a caliper to measure the thickness of the board. Then, using the same caliper at half the measured thickness, we can scribe a center line. The board can then be taken to the bandsaw for resawing. The newly milled rough edge can be cleaned up on a planer or my personal favorite, the drum sander. I often take the opportunity to use a drum sander because it does not produce any tear out and the thickness of the boards can be fine-tuned with ease. Before cutting the boards into smaller coasters, I also like to pre-sand to save time and hassle from sanding smaller individual pieces. I decided to make the coasters 3.75 inches by 3.75 inches. I find this size to be plenty large for holding most items, yet not so large that it looks out of place. I really like the look and softer feel of rounded corners on coasters. While you can use a sander to accomplish this task, using a template with a flush trim router bit produces a more consistent result. Let's take a quick moment to talk about router safety. A router is a powerful and dangerous tool. Always be mindful of the direction of the cutter head rotation and workpiece feed direction. In this case, we have a counterclockwise bit rotation and you want to feed the material into the cutter from left to right direction. It is also important to be mindful of the grain orientation of the wood. In this coaster, for example, we want to first introduce the edge grain of the wood and follow through into the cut of the end grain. This way, there's plenty of support beyond the leading edge of the cut. If you do not follow this principle and introduce the edge grain of the wood first, the cutter head has an extremely high chance of binding to the wood and throwing the piece away from you in a split second, increasing your risk for injury. With the coasters nearly completed, we can now shift focus onto the holder. For this, we're using a rough 2-inch thick walnut scrap piece. We won't need the entire width of the board and can rough cut it to something slightly wider than our coaster's width. Because this piece is fairly small and possibly too risky to put through the jointer planer, I'm choosing to flatten the surface and one edge by using a hand plane. With a sharp blade and proper technique, this can be accomplished pretty quickly. In order to flatten the opposite side, I'm using a drum sander. We can then clean up the final edge on a table saw. By using the coasters, we can determine the angle we want them to be nestled into the holder. The actual angle is not critical and you can eyeball it to your preference. We can then make the cut on a bandsaw and clean up with a sander. A quick pseudo assembly of all the parts can help us determine the width of the gap needed to fit all the coasters. And finally, we can proceed to glue up. I wanted to take a quick moment to discuss this Frankenstein clamping situation that we have going on. In woodworking, glue up and clamping is one of the more stressful events. And in this case, I definitely panicked and thought the solution to my problem would be to just add clamps everywhere. While that may be okay, the better approach is to plan ahead. Plan ahead with respect to where all of your clamps are, where all of the pieces are, and how they're coming together. In an ideal situation, I would probably approach this glue up in 2 different events. I would put the 3 middle pieces, the front, the back, and the bottom, at once and glue that up. And then I would clean up the edges on the table saw probably, and then come back and put the sides together and glue that up on another day. With the clamps removed, we can now put the coasters back inside just to make sure they will fit nicely with a small amount of wiggle room. The holder is then trimmed to final dimension. Both the holder and the coasters receive final sanding before finishing. Since the holder will not be subjected to high wear and tear, I'm using Danish oil because it provides a beautifully natural look and is easy to apply. Because coasters are meant to be used and abused, a durable finish is preferred. Nitrocellulose lacquer, particularly these spray cans, are extremely convenient for small jobs. For bigger projects, you can purchase large quantities of lacquer and use a HVLP spray gun. With a few coats dried, we're now done with this project. That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to click the like button below and consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.